Hey everybody, welcome back to Prototype, where we look at materials, processes, and tools that help you in your projects. So today we're going to be talking about calipers. Honestly, these are a really phenomenal tool, and as you saw, there are a variety of types. So we're going to talk about each of them, why you may want one over the other, and how they work. So let's head over to the bench and see what we've got. So first and foremost, let's get out of the way. Calipers is a very broad term. These specifically are Vernier calipers, a standard vernier, a digital vernier, and a dial vernier. Functionally, each of these pieces are used exactly the same. They function exactly the same. But how you read the information on the dial, the digital screen, as well as this analog area is very unique. So we'll take some time to go over each of them, and then we'll take some time to actually show how you use them by using this little sample piece. So one of the great things about digital is it's simple to read. Though in this case it's a little hard because my battery's pretty low, so sorry about that. This is currently in millimeters, and so we got 26.48 millimeters. Nice thing is we can just change that right here, click inches, and right there we have 1.04 inches. We can click that again, and we can get a fraction, 1 inch and 5/128ths, and we click it and it goes back to millimeters. Really nice. To zero this, you just go to the zero position and you click 0. So very simple, very straightforward. You do have these measurements that you can use, but not really necessary. So that is it. We're just going to freeze this image on a random measurement. And right there, yep. And so we can be measuring in both imperial and metric. So you can see for the inches, we have 1 inch and some points right there. So we're gonna go 0.1, 0.2, and you can see a little bit of the 3, but you need to see the whole thing in that little line afterwards. So we know it's 1 inch, 0.2, and we're gonna then move over to the dial. And you can see that we have the major measurements of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and then the minor measurements in between. So 50, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we can see that the full measurement is 1 inch, 0.255. Now for the metric, it's the exact same situation. We can see it goes up past the 30, and we have 2 more past that, but not quite. We can see on the dial caliper, it's a little different with metrics because 1 rotation is actually 2 millimeters. And so we're actually going to be looking at the fact that it's not quite past, and so it's just shy of that line. So we have 31.9 millimeters. And it looks like it's pretty much right on the dot, so might be a little bit over to the side. So it might be 31.89. It's somewhere right in between in this case. So one thing to note is if you want to be zeroing, I'm going to unfreeze the video real quick. If you want to zero this in, you just actually loosen up this dial. Actually, we're just going to close it up. And you can see it's zeroed. But let's say something happened and your dials are now off a little bit. You can just rotate this and then lock it in place and create a new 0. So that's something just to keep in mind. But I'm going to put it back because it actually looks great how it was. And that's that. That's how you use dial calipers. All right, first off, in the far right, you can see in the bottom corner, you have 0.05 millimeters. That is the tolerance, the amount of tolerance you're going to be able to get with this pair of calipers. And then in the top right, you can see it is 1/128th of an inch. So both very high, like minute measurements to be actually quite specific. So with the millimeters first, we're going to start at the 0 on the Vernier scale. And that's going to tell us a lot about the major measurements for this measurement. So we can see that it is 3 centimeters, so 30 millimeters, and it goes up to 38. We don't quite pass the 39 millimeter mark. So we're at 38 right now, and we're going to write that down. Now, we're going to use the Vernier scale to figure out which one of these dashes lines up with the dash above. So you can see in between you have 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, and that's representing 0.1, 0.15, 0.2, 0.25, etc. So we're going to keep moving along until we find one that lines up. And if we look at the 0.45 and 0.5, they're pretty darn close, but I think the 0.5 is actually the most accurate. So we're going to go with that. And now writing that down, that gives us 39.50 millimeters. And that is going to be the millimeter measurement. Now next, on the inches, very, very similar. We're going to use the 0 mark to find out where we're at. Each of those dashes is a 16th, so we have 1 inch, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 16ths, and now we just got to line up that dash. And so we're going to look around, and honestly, it looks like the second dash. And so that is 2 1/28ths. Now this is where math gets a little bit hairy. If you don't like fractions, sorry, the imperial system is a bit different. So we have 1 inch, 58 1/28ths of an inch is how you would measure that. So that is how you'd use a standard caliper. Okay, so we're going to use this dial caliper and this little 3D printed piece to talk about the different functions and how you would actually pull measurements with a pair of vernier calipers. So I would normally use the digital one, but it's actually kind of out of batteries, so we're just going to use this guy, which is also my preferred one. Okay, first off, we have the main measuring teeth right in here, and it's just quite simple. You can just put something right in between and push together and measure. If you wanted to, you can lock it so you have that measurement. Something to make sure you get right is if you look closely, let me pull it out, these drop down a little bit in these little grooves right here. Make sure you're not measuring from here to here, but here to here, because these are the measurements that you're looking for. So from that, we were able to see that this is 1 inch, 0.55. That's kind of nice. We can also use these edges right here. I'm going to unlock it, and I can actually check the diameter of this hole. You can see right there. I can pull that measurement from there. Next, we actually have all the way on this end. This was the third feature that I learned how to measure from. Honestly, it's really nice. So we can actually see how deep a hole is. In this case, we just put it all the way to the bottom, push it down, pull it out, and now we can see that measurement. Really, really nice. Depending on the caliper, some of them are a little bit wider, some of them are a little bit thinner. I like them thinner because if you have a smaller hole, it is able to fit. If not, it doesn't really work for you. So it's a little limited there. And last but not least, you actually have the back side. This edge right here is also something that I've seen being used, which actually kind of surprised me. I used these for years before I actually realized this was an option. But you can go back and we'll see if I can get this to work. You can see it's resting right there. And then I can push this right up to it. And I can get that measurement. You can see if I can put it next to it and see. It lines up right there. And so that we have that measurement there. If you want to like check just looking at it, you can, but it's never an idea to eyeball if you can avoid it. I mean, you have a precision tool, you might as well use it as a precision tool. So there are some other things on here you can see. I have like fillets. Fillets are kind of hard to measure, and so for me, I do eyeball fillets sometimes. And you can kind of see a little bit better with this line. I will line things up and then just kind of eyeball the radius. It's not preferred, but that's kind of what I tend to have to do in some cases. Same with a chamfer if you're doing something like that. But again, usually you don't need to. This is something that is meant to be giving you accurate measurements. So let's talk about the prices and the pros and cons of each of these, because it is a little bit different and it really boils down to preference for many of them. All right, so what are the pros and cons of each of these? Let's just start with these standard. Pros, they're accurate. They're actually very, very accurate, assuming you can read it accurately. They're also usually the cheaper of the three options, and so they're frequently found in schools, and they are the original of these three, and it came out much earlier. So very, very nice to use. The biggest con, though, is they're kind of complicated. If you don't like doing math with fractions or doing small decimals, it's a little bit more intensive in learning how to use these. So that's my biggest issue with these. Next, we have the digital. Digital, it's simple. It's really easy to use, which is great. You can get the measurements instantly in metric or imperial fraction, which is just really nice. They're a little bit more expensive, so that is a little bit of a con. And I think the biggest con, which you may have seen in this video, is they're battery powered. So if you run out of power, you're kind of screwed unless you have a spare battery. And they usually charge off of these little batteries right here. So that's my biggest issue with the digitals, and I shouldn't have opened that because now I can't close it. All right. Last but not least, we have the dial. I personally like these a lot, partially just because that's what I've been using mostly recently. So the nice thing about these is they also are very, very accurate. Oftentimes have the same accuracy as the standard, but they're easier to read. One of the biggest cons, though, is they're usually the most expensive. So it just depends on how much you're going to be measuring and how much you're using these. I use mine all the time, and so I eventually just justified buying a pair like these. So that is that. There are a lot of pros and cons to these. Also, plastic. I personally don't like plastic calipers. There's a few issues with them in terms of like heat or bending or warping if you're adding too much force. But for some people, if you're working with something you don't want to be scratching, like let's say watch or jewelry or maybe a soft stones, then maybe these aren't the best because they're going to scratch, and a plastic one might be more preferred. But for me, I'm usually working with 3D prints and other plastics, and so I don't really mind using the calipers or even just other metal. So if you're interested in buying any of these, I do have an affiliates link down below to Amazon, and I would really appreciate it if you used it, if again this is something you're interested in purchasing. If you're doing any 3D modeling, 3D printing, and in my opinion just general prototyping, these are amazing tools, and I would definitely suggest you getting one. And so it really just depends. I think of the three, my favorite is the dial, but I think for most people the digital is going to be the best option. Thank you so much for watching this. I hope you had a wonderful time. If you have any questions or comments about Vernier calipers, I would love to see them in the comments below. If you liked this video, if you found it helpful, smash that like button. And everybody, keep prototyping, and I will see you guys next time. See ya.